All right, Saagar, what are you looking at?
Well, presidential candidate Andrew Yang, he put out a sweeping new tech plan to regulate and reform big tech yesterday, in the latest sign that even a Silicon Valley adjacent figure like him is proposing radical changes to the technology industry. Yang was joined alongside presidential candidate Tulsi Gabbard in calling for big changes to redefining the way that social media platforms are legally treated under U.S. law. Now, Yang's proposals are literally an existential threat to existing social media companies and their business models. He seems to be leading the way the most in the field on this issue. And the proposal shows just how far some of this can go. And as a reluctant technology advocate, I fear it actually could have quite a bit of unintended consequences. Yang, he calls for an advertising value-added tax with the goal of eventually making social media platforms go towards a subscription-based service, rethinking the legal regime around social media companies, and passing a digital bill of rights in which people would own their data and would get compensation for its use. At the same time, Yang does not embrace Elizabeth Warren's call to break up these companies, instead wanting to offer, quote, guidance. Now let's take Yang's proposal on a digital VAT tax. I completely see where it's coming from. He wants to reduce profit motives from fusing with algorithms to push bad content. But right now, at this very moment, all of you are watching this on a show, on an open platform, and probably discovered it because it was related to content that you were searching for or that you like. Now, we both get to win. You have an awesome show that you get to watch every day, and we get to support the work that we do here. Does that come with a lot of systemic drawbacks? Yeah, and we should probably address those. But does that mean we want to live in a world where all social media platforms are subscription only? I don't think so. The internet's great promise and gift was openness. The only problem has been is that neoliberals sold us all a bill of goods in the 1990s by telling us that openness has zero costs. Now we can instead recognize and mitigate those costs without destroying the whole system as we know it. Or let's take a central element of Yang's proposal, establishing data as a property right and allowing individuals to be compensated for the use of that data if it's used by a big tech company like Google or Facebook when selling to advertisers. This, again, is a bit of a problem, as tech expert Gigi Sohn said on this show recently. Let's take a listen.
I also think that nobody is ever going to get compensated for what their data is worth. What is it worth? What is my personal information worth to my broadband company or to Google or Facebook? Who's actually going to put a dollar sign on it? I think it's impractical, and I also think it will only lead to more litigation and more claims of, this is mine, I must guard it jealously. Look, the Supreme Court has said you can't copyright the information in the phone book because that's information that everybody should have. But I think that's the logical next step of something like this, is the information in the phone book ought to be copyrighted, and let's start have lawsuits and litigation. Yeah. So that's not a conservative principle.
So Gigi makes a very convincing case there. The actual ownership of your data could have a lot of problems, while the core underlying concern is more about data privacy. Why not just tackle that instead? I have a lot more that I could touch on in this plan, but I'll leave it at those two examples to make this point. Yang's plan is one which gives a good diagnosis of all of the problems, but could have sprawling and bad effects on the user experience for a lot of us on the internet. I will say that one of the elements of the plan which I was very heartened to see was creating a government department to mitigate the effect of social media use and gaming on the developing minds of our children. That is something that concerns me greatly. I commend Yang for trying to come up with solutions to what I consider one of the most important policy areas of our current time. But I think he missed the mark in some pretty important ways that others questioning the role of technology in our daily lives have not. And Crystal, the reason I chose to do this is I am really passionate about the future of technology and the way that it can be shaped around government policy.
Right.
I was just, I worry that it's like the platform thing, like moving platforms into a subscription-only service. A lot of benefit has come from openness. I mean, so many, the millions of people who watch the show would not be able to without openness of platform.
Right. They wouldn't have paid for it. Maybe you'd pay for a subscription now that you know how awesome it is.
Right.
But at the beginning, when you're just trying it out,
it's like, congrats, you just created cable. That's basically a cable company. That's essentially the same thing.
No, that's true.
So it's important that we understand, what is he really getting at? Is that algorithmic content fused with advertising has perverse effects in our lives. lives.
Right.
It's a scary thing.
Because what that means is, and you saw this in particular on YouTube, basically they would, push you to more and more sort of extreme, inflammatory, et cetera content.
Because it keeps you watching.
Because it keeps you watching. And so that's what the profit incentives were for. Personally, I'm in favor of a government algorithm regulator that just pushes rising content all day.
That's one thing that Yang proposes. He actually spells out rising in his
We'll talk to him about getting that added in.
Yeah.
But no, look, it's very interesting as a reflection of sort of his overall philosophy.
Yeah, I agree.
Because he has this view of, this is the world as I see it, and this is where things are inevitably heading. So what can I do to balance the scales? What can I do rather than impeding that direction? How can I give power back to people? And so that's the idea of owning your own data. However, I think this really, the sort of basic underlying issue with all of these things, whether you're talking about privacy, whether you're talking about data, whether you're talking about control over our political conversation, all of these things is just these couple of entities having way too much power.
Right.
I mean, that's what it comes down to, and this plan doesn't really address it. Like you, I'm a parent, I have 3 kids, and the battle with can I have the phone, can I have the phone, can I have the phone with them is constant and pervasive, and so I really appreciate him trying to tackle this issue. Obviously, he's a parent as well, because the science says that addiction to the phone, it's the same brain wiring and brain chemistry as drugs.
Right.
It's literally like giving your kids drugs all day long.
The Surgeon General said that on that show, on this show, and that's what I said. I want to give him as much credit as possible. Do you see anybody else even talking about this? No, it's literally one of the most important areas of regulation for our entire lives.
Daily lives, yeah.
There's a reason that the youngest Republican senator, Josh Hawley, same thing, has been leading the way on Section 230 reform. Many of the same things that Andrew Yang is talking about here. They actually share similar legislation on loot boxes. What I think this shows is that New Left and the New Right are really coming together to tackle these emerging problems. And I learned this yesterday. I think the most numerous age in the United States is age 27. And we should be thinking about what that means whenever it comes to shaping government policy. What is the future of a 27-year-old and their children? Because at 27, you're beginning to get married and have kids. What does that look like? And that is something that only Yang really has begun talking about here.
I was kind of stunned. I interviewed Virginia Senator Mark Warner, who comes from telecom industries, like a sort of centrist, business-friendly Democrat. That's always been his background. And I asked him about breaking up big tech companies, and he left the door open to that. He said he wasn't there yet, but he was open to it, because it just goes to show you the people who understand tech the most are the most concerned, which is why, the executives at Twitter and Facebook, et cetera, they don't let their kids have these things all day long.
Exactly.
They limit the time deeply. And we were so concerned for a while. There was this deep concern about a digital divide between the wealthy and the poor not having access. Now what's actually developing is the digital divide between the wealthy being the ones really limiting their kids and being the executives at these companies, understanding how damaging it is, and people who aren't. I mean, in our public schools even, they're sitting kids in front of tablets and schools, et cetera, as a substitute for having expensive human bodies to teach them. So kudos to Andrew for tackling this problem.
Absolutely.
This is a sticky one, and I appreciate his leadership on this.
Couldn't agree more.
Next up on Rising, new reporting from the Hill, Vice President Joe Biden leading in 2 critical states, and we're going to talk about Pete Buttigieg's Iowa surge.
Stick around. The Hill's editor-in-chief Bob Cusack. He's in next with the debrief.